Hey, welcome back everybody to part 3 of the French cleat plane till. Last time we filled the holes in the pallet wood using some epoxy resin. Today we're going to start cutting joinery. This is called the box joint or finger joint, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. So the plan is for the 4 corners of the plane till, the outer corners of the cabinet, to be attached using the box joints. I like the look of it, especially when you're looking at it from the side. It just gives a really pretty appearance because you see the end grain and also the side grain of the wood, and I think it really makes the project stand out. So I've got all the pieces cut to final length, and I've got the pieces cut to final width and plane down to 3/8 of an inch. This piece is actually going to be the shelf, so we're not going to put the box joint on that one. So we're going to be putting the box joints on these 4 boards here, and then we can dry fit it today and see how the joints come together. I'm planning to attach the shelf to the cabinet using a dado joint, and once we get the 4 corners of basically the frame of the till put together, then I can take the final measurements for the dado joint, and also the final measurements for the shelf. So you can certainly cut the box joints by hand using a handsaw and a chisel, but for this project I'm actually going to use this jig that I made. It's a box joint jig for the router table. You can also build a similar jig that can be used on the table saw as well. The way the jig works is it has this piece of cherry that I cut that actually spaces the material being cut out it basically keeps the bit in the correct position. And then as you cut your first box joint, then you move over and cut the second. I tried using the straight cutter bit, and I was getting a lot of tear out, so that's why I decided to buy the spiral bits. Now I bought a kit on Amazon, and I'll put a link to that of the bits that I purchased for this project. So I've got the top and the bottom board clamped together here. I've tried to get it as perfectly square with one another as I can. I'm hoping by clamping these 2 boards together and cutting the box joints as basically one board, it'll increase the chances that my joints line up perfectly. I guess one downfall to doing it this way is if you mess up, you're going to mess up both boards. But if that's the case, then I'll just have to cut the ends off and make it a little bit smaller. So I think I've got the camera in a position where you can see. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my dust collector, and we'll go ahead and cut the first side and see how it works. So here's the first side, and the joints are lining up really just perfectly. So what I did before I cut this side is actually marked the side that's going to be the front. So I don't know if you can tell very easily, but this pin here is slightly bigger than this pin. That just means the board is not exactly 9.5 inches in width. But I don't want to have a larger pin and a shorter pin on opposite sides of the board. What I mean by that is, if the larger pin is on this side, I want the larger pin to be on this side as well. So I went through the jig like that. So what I need to do is flip the board over and then go through the jig this way. That way the wider joint is on the same side of the board. I wouldn't want them to be on opposite corners, otherwise the cabinet wouldn't line up very nicely. So now I'm ready to cut the two sides, and again I've marked what I want to be the front of each of the boards. I picked the two sides of the panels that I like the best, and one is facing up and one is facing down, and then I marked what the front of the cabinet will be here just for my notation. That way when I go through the jig, I know I know exactly where the front of the cabinet will be and the back of the cabinet will be. So for the top and the bottom, the pin is on the outermost portion of the board, but for the sides the pin needs to be inset so it can mate with the other box joints. So let me show you how we're going to do that. So I've cut a piece of cherry as a spacer that is the exact dimensions of a pin on the box joint, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it here to space out the next board. And what that'll do is it'll actually, instead of putting the pin on the outside of the board, it'll inset the pin and leave a mortise on the outside instead of a pin. So this is essentially what it will look like, is the board will be spaced out by this spacer, and then that in turn will cut on the outside of the board. And then once we have that cut, then the rest of the process is the same. We just move it over like this, and then go through the router bit, and then move it over, go through, move it over, go through. As soon as I did it, I knew that I messed up. I cut this, the board moved on me a little bit when I was pushing it through the jig, and as you can see, that groove there is larger than the pin will be. So that creates two problems. Number one, once it's all put together, there'll be a gap there like that. But the second problem is I can't push the boards up against my jig, or everything's going to be offset about a 1/16 or maybe, yeah, probably about a 1/16 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to glue in some blocks here and let that dry overnight, and then I'll come back tomorrow, and then I can go back and recut this groove here, because I don't want all the joints to be offset, because what that'll do is that means the boards won't line up correctly, and then I'll have to plane off the edges, and it'll make the cabinet smaller in terms of its width. So let me glue in a couple of these pieces, and we'll let that sit up overnight, and then in the morning I can come back and reroute these grooves. If I didn't glue these pieces in here, it would drive me crazy every time I looked at it and noticed that there was a small gap there in the box joint. So we'll let this set up overnight. It'll delay us a little bit, but it'll be worth it in the end to know that it's right. So it's been probably about 14 or 15 hours since I glued on the blocks here. The blocks weren't exactly the right size for the hole that I had grooved out, but I'm just going to take my time when setting up the box joint jig And this time I'm just going to clamp it in place. That way I know it doesn't move on me. And then we'll go ahead and take out that chunk and leave a little bit there so it doesn't leave a gap in the final product. So I've got the boards put back into the jig, and I've got it clamped really tightly in place. That way it won't move when I make the first pass, taking out the groove on the outside of the board. Hopefully you can see okay that I've got the spacer there and I got it really tightly in place. I'll move the spacer before I start to cut, because I don't want the spacer to get dislodged or thrown. I don't know if you can see when I was cutting, but I made another mistake, and this one was more careless. I just looked away for a second to move something, and the wood sort of slipped and hit the bit a little bit. So it took a little bit of a dent out of that pin. That one's going to be a little bit tougher to fix until we're done. I'll probably have to put a little bit of sawdust or putty or something in that, but we'll just wait till we get it all assembled, and then I think I can fix it. It just unfortunately I took my eyes away for just a second and goofed up that pin a little bit. So let's go ahead and see if we can put the four corners together of the outside portion of the plane till frame, and then we can take some final measurements for the dados and also the final length of the shelf. So I've got one corner together, and this corner went together perfectly. There was I didn't have to make any modifications to the joints. The other ones I'm noticing are a little bit tight in a couple spots, and what I'm going to have to do is go back with my chisel and just take just a slight shaving off a few of the pins so that it fits together perfectly. That probably means that my jig is off by just a paper thin amount. It doesn't really surprise me that much that it's off a little bit. I was sort of expecting that, especially trying to put four corners together. I knew that there was going to be a little bit of adjustments that needed to be made. But I can tell by looking that the upper pins seem to be pretty close. Seems like for some reason about halfway down it started to get off just a little bit. So I'm just going to take literally just a chisel worth off of those pins at the bottom, and I think that'll be enough. The joints feel a little tighter than what I prefer, but I think I'm at the point now where I can go ahead and pull the joints together with the clamps. 3 of the 4 went together pretty well, but this corner over here really gave me a lot of trouble. I'm not gluing it or anything right now, so I don't have to be super forceful with it. I can always go back once I pull it apart and fine tune some of the joints, because once I take it apart, I'll be able to see if the wood is compressing a lot in any certain spots. And if that's the case, then I can take the chisel and work on that a little bit. This is the corner that gave me so much trouble, and honestly, it looks pretty good, even with me having to modify some of the pins a little bit. And I mean, once I glue it up, I mean, the glue will fill up a lot of the gaps there, and then I can always add some putty if I need to, but I don't think I'll really need to add much. I'm just trying to make sure I get the joints nice and compressed in there without breaking any of the pins off. That way when I take it back apart, I can still fine tune it a little bit. Getting these 4 joints together has probably taken me an hour. So if you ever wondered why fine furniture costs so much, this is one of the reasons. To get these joints right, it takes a lot of time. So I got the 4 corners pulled nicely together and squared things up pretty well, just so I could start to eyeball where I wanted my shelf, and then also the dividers that will store some of the more specialty planes. I'm really just playing around with some different layouts just to basically accommodate the planes that I currently own, but to also leave a little bit of room at least for maybe some specialty planes I'll have in the future. But there'll be a shelf across here and then dividers down here, and I'm gonna dado a groove for the dividers in both the shelf and the bottom of the cabinet, and then the actual area in which the hand planes with the flat base will be stored up here. But I'm trying to maximize my space down here for those specialty planes, and I may even make some dividers that can be slid in and pulled out. Like if I had some smaller planes that just needed a small place to be stored. So I think I've decided that the bottom of the shelf will be 7.5 inches from the bottom of the frame, or from this part here in the frame, and that will leave me a little bit more room up here for the majority of the planes, but that should also give me enough room to have the specialty planes down here as well. I can always put some on top too if I run out of room on the bottom. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark off 7.5 inches on the sides, and then set up my router table to put a dado on each side. That way the shelf can be slid into those dados. In addition to cutting the dados for the shelf, I'm also going to go ahead and mark out where I want my dividers. And I think just for a matter of symmetry, it'll look better to have a divider in the very middle, and then I'm not sure that it matters so much on each side of the middle divider. So I think what I'll do is I'll split the middle in half and put a divider here, and then actually have 2 dividers on this side, so I have a little bit more room for more planes. So I've got everything marked for my dados, and I'm going to go ahead and break the cabinet apart gently, because I don't want to break any of the finger joints. And then I'm going to start setting up my router to cut those dados. Once that's done, this thing will be getting really close to being done. I think that's a good stopping point for today, guys. As always, I really appreciate you watching. If you like this video, you like these type of videos, be sure to hit the thumbs up and leave me a comment. I read every single one of them. Thanks for watching, guys.